Hi there, welcome to Jville Stories. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notifications to get updated when interesting stories are uploaded. Thank you. The dense forest was alive with the whispers of unseen forces, the moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy of trees. Damien Jr., clad in a black robe embroidered with strange glowing symbols, stood motionless. His trembling hands clutched a ceremonial dagger, its blade etched with ancient markings. Before him, on an altar carved from stone and smeared with dried blood, lay his son, a boy of barely 5 years. The child's wide, innocent eyes reflected confusion as he looked up at his father, the man he trusted above all else. "Father, why are we here?" the boy asked softly, his voice tinged with fear. Damien Jr. averted his gaze, his heart pounding. He could hear the chants of the elders surrounding him, their deep voices weaving a sinister melody into the night air. These were the leaders of the Brotherhood of the Eclipse, the powerful and secretive cult that promised limitless wealth and influence to those who obeyed its unyielding rules. The ritual was the price Damien had to pay to ascend to the pinnacle of power, a price he had convinced himself was necessary. "Be strong, my son," Damien whispered, his voice faltering. "This is for the greater good, for our family." The boy's innocent tears glistened in the moonlight, but Damien shut his eyes, trying to silence the nagging voice in his head that screamed for him to stop. The leader of the ritual, a towering figure whose face was obscured by a mask, stepped forward. "Time is running out, Damien," the leader intoned, his voice echoing as if it carried the weight of the forest itself. "The gods do not wait for hesitation. Deliver the sacrifice, or you will forfeit your chance to rise." Damien's hands shook as he raised the dagger. He could feel the eyes of the cult members piercing through him, their collective power binding him to his purpose. Images of the life he wanted, a sprawling empire, unyielding respect, and unimaginable riches flashed before his eyes. The lure of power overwhelmed his paternal instincts, and with a guttural cry, he brought the blade down. The forest erupted into chaos. The boy's cries echoed briefly before being swallowed by the night, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to hold its breath. Damien staggered back, dropping the dagger. He fell to his knees, his chest heaving as he watched the cult members begin their incantations, their hands raised to the heavens. The body on the altar began to glow faintly, and the wind howled through the trees as the forest itself mourned the loss of innocence. But the ritual was far from over. As the ceremony reached its climax, a chilling laughter filled the air, low and guttural. It was not human. Damien froze, his blood running cold. He turned to see the spectral figure of his son standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You took my life, Father," the ghostly figure whispered, its voice dripping with sorrow and malice. "But I will never leave you," Damien screamed, his mind unraveling as the apparition moved closer. The other cult members ignored his cries, focused on sealing their pact with the gods. But for Damien, the haunting had begun, and the wealth he had killed for now seemed like a curse. The spirit of his son would torment him, unrelenting, until he was driven to the brink of madness. The forest fell silent again as the ritual ended, but for Damien Jr., peace would never come. His son's laughter echoed in his ears as he stumbled out of the clearing, the weight of his actions pressing down on his soul. And so began the slow unraveling of Damien Jr., the first victim of the Brotherhood of the Eclipse's newest cycle of greed and destruction. The city of Uyo hummed with life, its streets bustling with hawkers, taxis, and ambitious dreamers navigating the chaos. Among them was Michael Ekong, a young man whose tall, lean frame carried the weariness of someone who had spent years chasing dreams that always seemed just out of reach. At 28, Michael had a degree in software engineering from one of Nigeria's top universities, but his journey into the tech world had been anything but smooth. Every pitch, every job application, and every side hustle seemed to end in disappointment. "Another rejection?" asked Joseph, his cousin and closest confidant, as they sat on the veranda of their modest family home. Joseph was sipping on a bottle of Coke, his relaxed demeanor contrasting Michael's visible frustration. Michael slammed his laptop shut and sighed heavily. "They said I lacked the experience they're looking for." How am I supposed to get experience if no one gives me a chance? Joseph shrugged. Maybe it's time to think smaller. You're trying to build an empire overnight, Mike. Start with something manageable. But Michael wasn't interested in manageable. He wanted more. Growing up under the roof of his maternal uncle, Patrick, and Aunt Gloria had taught him the value of humility and hard work. Yet it also planted in him a deep-seated desire to escape the shadow of mediocrity. His uncle, a retired civil servant, often reminded Michael of the dangers of ambition untempered by patience, a lesson Michael found increasingly hard to swallow. Small things don't change the world, Joseph, Michael muttered, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I want to be someone important, someone people remember, Joseph chuckled. And when you're important, don't forget to send me a Range Rover. Michael smiled faintly but didn't respond. Deep down, he knew his ambitions weren't born out of selfishness. He wanted to make life better for his family and escape the quiet judgment of those who saw him as a failed prodigy. The next day, Michael dressed in his best shirt and headed to yet another business pitch. This time, it was for a smart irrigation system he designed to help local farmers maximize their crop yields. He had spent weeks preparing, rehearsing his lines, and perfecting his presentation. The venue was an upscale hotel filled with men and women in sharp suits. Michael felt out of place, but pushed the thought aside as he joined the other presenters in the waiting area. Hours later, as Michael walked out of the conference room, his shoulders slumped. Another polite rejection, another dead end. As he approached the hotel lobby, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a former university acquaintance, Chika, who had recently started working for a prominent PR firm. Mike, I know you're looking for opportunities. There's a networking event tonight at the Eclipse estate. You should come, big names will be there. It could be your chance, Michael hesitated. He had heard whispers about the Ekong family, especially Chief Victor. They were a powerful, influential family in Cross River, but there were also rumors, dark ones, about how they had acquired their wealth. Still, the prospect of meeting people who could open doors was too tempting to ignore. I'll be there, he replied, sealing his fate. That evening, as Michael stepped into the sprawling compound of the Ekong estate, he was awestruck by the opulence before him. The mansion, adorned with glittering lights and manicured gardens, seemed like a world apart from the streets he knew. The scent of expensive wine and freshly grilled meats wafted through the air, mingling with the soft hum of classical music. It was here, in the midst of luxury and power, that Michael met Clara Ekong, the wife of Chief Victor. Draped in a flowing silk gown, her presence commanded attention. Beside her was her son, Damien Jr., whose sharp eyes studied Michael with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. You must be the young man Chika mentioned, Clara said, her voice smooth and inviting. Yes, ma, Michael replied, bowing slightly. You have ambition, she said, more a statement than a question. I like that, ambition opens doors. Stick with us and we'll help you find your way. For the first time in years, Michael felt like his life was about to change. Little did he know, the price of Clara's help would lead him down a path darker than he could ever imagine. The glow of the Ekong estate lingered in Michael's mind as he sat on the edge of his bed the next morning. He replayed every moment of the previous night in his head, Clara's poised elegance, Damien Jr.'s calculating smirk, and the cryptic promise of doors opening to him. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt like he was finally being noticed by the right people. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Clara Ekong herself. Her rich, commanding voice came through the line like a summons. Michael, she began, I was impressed with you last night. Meet me at our office downtown at noon. Bring your portfolio. We have someone you should meet. Michael's heart raced as he prepared for the meeting. This could be the break he needed. Armed with his laptop and a folder of his projects, he arrived at the Ekong Group's headquarters, a towering glass building that dominated the city's skyline. As he stepped into the grand reception area, he was struck by the sheer scale of the operation. Everything about the place screamed wealth and power. He was ushered into a sleek conference room where Clara was seated beside a man he hadn't seen the night before. This is Mr. Davies, one of our senior directors, Clara said, gesturing to the man. He oversees our innovation and investment unit. I told him about your ideas and he's very interested. Michael's palms felt clammy as he launched into his pitch. He explained his smart irrigation system, showing slides and prototypes he had painstakingly prepared. To his relief, Davies nodded along, asking insightful questions that Michael answered with precision. Clara remained silent, watching him with an intensity that made him uneasy. When he finished, Davies smiled. Impressive. You've got potential, Michael. I can see why Clara recommended you. We can connect you with investors to bring this idea to life. But first, we need to refine the business model. Work with us and you'll go far, Michael's heart soared. Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you. As the meeting ended, Clara walked him to the elevator. This is just the beginning, Michael, she said, her tone low and conspiratorial. Stick with us and you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. But remember, nothing worthwhile comes without effort. Are you ready to do whatever it takes? The question lingered in the air, and though Michael hesitated, he nodded. Yes, Ma. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Clara and Davies introduced Michael to powerful figures in the tech and business sectors. His once simple ideas began gaining traction, and for the first time, investors started to take him seriously. Invitations to high society events poured in, and Michael quickly became a familiar face among Uyo's elite. Despite his growing success, Michael couldn't shake an underlying unease. Damien Jr.'s presence loomed over every event. He often caught the man watching him from across the room, his gaze cold and calculating. Clara, too, seemed to exert a strange influence, her casual comments often feeling like veiled commands. One evening, Michael was invited to dinner at the Ikanem mansion. It was an intimate gathering, just Clara, Damien Jr., and Michael. Over the course of the meal, Damien began asking pointed questions about Michael's ambitions. "What's the end game for you?" Damien asked, swirling his glass of wine. "Is it just about money, or do you want something more?" Michael hesitated. "I want to make a difference. I want to leave a legacy," Damien smirked. "A legacy requires power, and power doesn't come cheap. Are you prepared to pay the price?" Michael frowned, unsure how to respond. Clara cut in, her tone light but her words sharp. "Don't scare the boy, Damien. Michael is smart. He'll understand in time that true success requires sacrifices." The conversation shifted, but Michael left the mansion with a knot in his stomach. What kind of sacrifices were they talking about? A week later, Clara called Michael with an invitation to another exclusive event. "This is a special gathering," she said. "Only the most influential people will be there. Dress sharply and don't be late." The event was held at a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city. As Michael arrived, he noticed the air felt different, heavier. The attendees, though impeccably dressed, exuded an almost predatory energy. Inside, he found Damien Jr. waiting for him. "Welcome to the inner circle," Damien said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Tonight, you'll see what it really means to belong." Michael was led into a dimly lit room where a group of men and women stood in a circle. In the center was an ornate table adorned with candles and symbols Michael didn't recognize. The room was thick with the scent of incense, and an uneasy silence hung in the air. "Observe," Damien whispered. "This is where legacies are forged." As the ceremony unfolded, Michael's unease grew. The words spoken were cryptic, but their meaning was clear. This was no ordinary networking event. This was something darker. Clara caught his eye from across the room and smiled as if to say, "You've chosen this path. There's no turning back now." By the end of the night, Michael left the estate shaken, but unable to deny the allure of the power he had witnessed. He was being drawn deeper into a world he didn't fully understand, and though he wanted to walk away, the taste of success was too intoxicating to resist. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. He had been invited to present one of his tech ideas at a high-profile investors summit in Uyo's premier conference center. Organized by the city's top industrialists, the summit was his biggest opportunity yet. Clara Ikanem had pulled strings to secure his slot, but she had made it clear failure was not an option. As he took the stage, the room felt overwhelmingly large. The audience consisted of sharp-eyed investors, billionaire magnates, and decision-makers who could change the trajectory of anyone's life with a single handshake. Michael's confidence faltered for a moment, but he steadied himself. He presented his idea for a smart irrigation system, detailing its potential to revolutionize agriculture in rural Nigeria. The audience was silent as he finished. He scanned their faces for any signs of interest, but most remained expressionless. Michael's heart sank. Impressive, a voice called out. The crowd parted slightly to reveal Alhaji Ibrahim Sani, a towering figure known as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Clad in a finely tailored suit, his presence exuded authority. Ibrahim's sharp eyes locked onto Michael as he approached the stage. "Young man," Ibrahim began, his tone calm but commanding, "your idea is bold, and boldness is what this country needs. I see potential in you." Michael felt his spirits lift as Ibrahim extended a hand. The handshake felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of an unspoken agreement. "Let's talk," Ibrahim said, leading Michael off the stage. Hours later, Michael found himself in a private lounge within the conference center. The room was dimly lit, and Ibrahim leaned back in a leather armchair, his piercing gaze never leaving Michael. "Clara speaks highly of you," Ibrahim said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "She rarely vouches for anyone." "That says something," Michael nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Tell me, Michael, what do you want out of life?" Ibrahim asked, his voice low but penetrating. Michael hesitated, then spoke with sincerity. "I want to succeed. I want to make a name for myself and create something that lasts." Ibrahim smirked, swirling his drink. "Ambition, good. But ambition without power is like a car without fuel. You'll never reach your destination." Michael leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean," Ibrahim continued, "you need the right people backing you. Connections, influence. You've scratched the surface, but if you truly want to rise, you'll need more than talent. You'll need to prove you're willing to do what it takes." Michael's pulse quickened. He felt as though Ibrahim was offering him the keys to a world he had always dreamed of entering, but had never been allowed to touch. "I can help you," Ibrahim said, leaning closer. "But know this, success comes at a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" The room seemed to grow quieter as the weight of Ibrahim's words settled on Michael. He thought of his struggles, his family's sacrifices, and the countless rejections he had faced. The answer seemed obvious. "Yes," Michael said firmly. Over the next few weeks, Ibrahim kept his promise. Michael found himself whisked into meetings with influential figures. His ideas were funded without hesitation, and his reputation soared. Clara remained a guiding presence, offering advice and ensuring he made the right connections. But with every step forward, Michael began to notice subtle oddities. Meetings with Ibrahim often took place in shadowy rooms where he overheard cryptic conversations about initiations and the cost of loyalty. At one dinner, Ibrahim introduced him to a man who handed Michael an ancient looking coin, saying, "This is your first step." "What does it mean?" Michael asked. "Just hold on to it," the man replied with a sly smile. One night, after a particularly lavish event hosted by Ibrahim, Michael returned home feeling both exhilarated and uneasy. His cousin Joseph, ever the perceptive one, noticed immediately. "You look different," Joseph said, eyeing Michael as he loosened his tie. More intense. "What's going on?" Michael shrugged. "Things are finally happening for me. Clara and Ibrahim have connected me with the right people." Joseph frowned. "That's great, but be careful. I've heard stories about those circles. Not everyone who rises fast stays on top for long." Michael waved off the warning, but Joseph's words stayed with him. As Michael's success grew, so did Ibrahim's influence over him. One day, Ibrahim summoned him to a private estate on the outskirts of the city. The estate was vast with manicured gardens and guards stationed at every corner. Inside, Michael was led into a dimly lit room filled with strange symbols painted on the walls. Ibrahim stood at the center, surrounded by a group of men and women dressed in black. "This," Ibrahim said, gesturing to the group, "is the council that shapes the future. You've been chosen to join us." Michael felt his chest tighten. The air in the room seemed heavier, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It means you're special," Ibrahim replied. "But it also means you'll have to prove your loyalty." As the group began chanting in a language Michael didn't understand, He felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He was in too deep now, and though part of him wanted to run, he couldn't deny the pull of the power they offered. The eerie chanting from the ritual echoed in Michael's mind for days. Although he didn't fully understand what he had witnessed, he knew he was crossing a line he might never return from. His newfound wealth and connections began to bear fruit. He received funding for his irrigation project. Media coverage hailed him as a rising star in the tech world, and invitations to exclusive events came pouring in. Yet beneath the success, a gnawing unease began to grow. Michael's uncle Patrick noticed the changes first. Over dinner one evening, he cleared his throat and said, "Michael, you've been spending a lot of time with these Ekong people. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" Michael, cutting into his food, avoided Patrick's gaze. "Uncle, this is what I've worked for. These people are helping me achieve my dreams." Patrick frowned. Dreams that come too quickly often have a price. Clara and Victor Ekong aren't known for clean dealings. "You need to be careful." Michael brushed off the warning, but the words lingered. Elsewhere in New York, Akpan Udoh, a tenacious investigative journalist, was piecing together the puzzle of a disturbing trend, a string of mysterious deaths linked to prominent figures in New York's elite. The deaths of a young boy and his mother, the wife and grandson of Damian Jr. Ekong, had particularly drawn his attention. Despite the police ruling the cases as accidental, Akpan had uncovered evidence that suggested foul play. Late one night, as Akpan scoured his files, he stumbled across the name Pastor Daniel Ekong, a man who had once been involved in a powerful occult group before renouncing it to become a preacher. Through back channels, Akpan arranged to meet the pastor at his modest church. Pastor Daniel, now in his late 50s, exuded a calm, dignified presence. He listened intently as Akpan laid out his findings. "These deaths," Akpan said, showing the pastor a photograph of Damian Jr., "they all seem to connect back to the Brotherhood of the Eclipse." Pastor Daniel's face darkened. "The Brotherhood is a force of unimaginable evil," he said, his voice low. "I was once part of their world and it nearly destroyed me. If they're active again, it means more blood will be spilled." Akpan hesitated before asking the next question. "Pastor, do you have a son named Michael?" Daniel froze, his expression shifting from calm to shock. "Why do you ask?" "I've been following his rise. He's connected to Clara and Damian Jr. Ekong. I suspect they've drawn him into their circle." Daniel's heart sank. He hadn't seen his son in over a decade, but the thought of Michael falling into the same darkness he had escaped filled him with dread. The next day, Daniel tracked Michael down to his office in the heart of Uyo's business district. It had been years since they had seen each other, and Michael was visibly uncomfortable when his father entered unannounced. "Michael," Daniel began, his tone both firm and pleading. "I need to speak with you." Michael glanced at his staff and gestured for them to leave. Once they were alone, he folded his arms. "What do you want?" "I've heard about your involvement with the Ekongs," Daniel said. "You need to stay away from them." Michael scoffed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. They've helped me build everything I have." "They don't help for free," Daniel countered. "I know their world, Michael. I was part of it once. The promises they make come at a terrible cost." Michael's frustration boiled over. "You left us, remember? You abandoned me and my mother to chase your own redemption. Now you want to come back and give me advice? It's too late for that." Daniel's face fell. "I made mistakes, Michael. But I'm here now, and I'm telling you, this path you're on leads to destruction." Michael turned away, unable to meet his father's gaze. "Thanks for the concern, but I can handle myself." As Daniel left the office, he prayed silently, asking for strength to save his son before it was too late. That evening, Michael received a call from Clara. "Michael, come to the estate. We have something important to discuss." When he arrived, Clara greeted him with her usual poise, but there was a new edge to her demeanor. She led him into a study where Alhaji Ibrahim and Damian Jr. were waiting. "You've been doing well, Michael," Ibrahim said, his deep voice filling the room. "But success comes with responsibilities. It's time for you to show your commitment." Michael frowned. "What kind of commitment?" Damian smirked. "Don't worry, it's nothing you can't handle." Ibrahim handed Michael a small black envelope. Inside is the name of someone who stands in the way of our plans. You'll deliver this to them, and you'll ensure they understand the consequences of their defiance." Michael's hands shook as he took the envelope. I don't think I can." "You can," Clara interrupted, her voice icy. "And you will. This is the cost of being part of our world. You wanted success, Michael. Now prove you're willing to keep it." The weight of the envelope felt unbearable as Michael left the estate. His father's warning rang in his ears, but the pressure from Clara and Ibrahim was suffocating. He was being pulled deeper into a web he couldn't escape, and he feared it was only the beginning. The night air felt heavy as Michael returned home, clutching the black envelope that Clara had given him. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, the gravity of the situation beginning to sink in. The price of his newfound wealth and status had never been clearer. The envelope held more than just a name, it symbolized the point of no return. He set the envelope on his desk, staring at it as if it might burst into flames. After several minutes of internal conflict, he finally opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper with a name, Mr. Adebayo Oladele, a prominent investor who had recently opposed one of the Ikanem Group's lucrative contracts. Michael's breath quickened. He wasn't being asked to intimidate someone. This was something darker. The instructions were clear. Deliver the message to Mr. Oladele and ensure he understood the consequences. The vague phrasing sent chills down Michael's spine. The next day, Michael drove to Mr. Oladele's office, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He rehearsed what he would say, but every scenario ended with him questioning why he had agreed to this. When he arrived, the receptionist led him to a conference room. Mr. Oladele, a distinguished man in his late 50s, greeted Michael warmly. Michael Ekong, I've heard about your work. What can I do for you?" Michael hesitated, his palms sweating. I have a message to deliver," he stammered, placing the envelope on the table. Oladele opened it, his face hardening as he read the note. "So they've sent you," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "You're young, talented, and full of potential, yet you've allowed yourself to be their pawn. Do you even know what you've gotten yourself into?" Michael felt his stomach churn. "I'm just trying to build a life for myself." Oladele shook his head. "They'll chew you up and spit you out. Take it from someone who's seen what they're capable of. Whatever they've promised you, it's not worth the cost." Michael left the office feeling nauseous. Oladele's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time he began to question whether the success he had worked so hard for was worth the mounting sacrifices. Later that evening, Esther, the school teacher Michael had met at a party, called him. Her warmth was a balm to his frayed nerves. They had been seeing more of each other, and her grounded, compassionate nature had become a refuge for him. "Michael, are you okay? You sound tense," she said. "I'm fine," he lied, but she saw through it. "You can talk to me," Esther said gently. "Whatever it is, I'm here." For a brief moment, Michael considered telling her everything, the cult, the sacrifices, the fear gnawing at him, but he couldn't bring himself to drag her into the darkness surrounding him. Instead, he changed the subject and promised to take her out the following weekend. At the same time, Clara and Ibrahim were watching Michael closely. Clara sensed his hesitation and decided it was time to push him further into their world. At a private gathering, she introduced him to a new group of influential figures, all members of the Brotherhood of the Eclipse. "This," Clara said, gesturing to the group, "is the council that shapes the future of this country. You're part of something bigger than yourself now, Michael. But every step forward requires proof of your loyalty." As the meeting progressed, Michael realized this was no ordinary business circle. These people wielded power that extended far beyond wealth. They influenced politics, industry, and even law enforcement. He was in the presence of individuals who could make or break his future with a single word. One of the members, an older woman named Madame Eve, leaned forward and fixed Michael with a piercing gaze. "We've been watching you," she said. "You've done well so far, but there's one final test before you can fully join us. A life must be given freely or by force. The gods demand it." Michael's blood ran cold. Clara smiled, her voice soft but firm. "The choice is yours, Michael. But remember, the path you've chosen doesn't allow for hesitation. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The weight of their words pressed down on him. When morning came, he called Joseph, his cousin, and asked him to visit. Joseph arrived later that day, immediately sensing Michael's distress. "What's going on, Mike? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael hesitated, then finally opened up. He told Joseph everything: the cult, the demands, the sacrifices. By the time he finished, Joseph was pacing the room, his face pale. "This is insane, Michael," Joseph said. "You need to get out now. Forget the money, forget the success. These people will destroy you." Michael buried his face in his hands. "I can't just walk away. They'll come after me." Joseph placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll find a way to fight them. But you can't do this alone." Later that evening, Michael received another call from Clara. Her voice was colder than usual. "Michael, time is running out. We need your decision." Michael's heart pounded. I need more time." "There is no more time," Clara replied sharply. "If you want to stay in our world, you'll do what's required. If not, you know the consequences." The call ended, leaving Michael feeling trapped. The weight of the decision bore down on him: sacrifice someone he cared about or risk losing everything he had built and possibly his life. As he sat alone in his apartment, the walls seemed to close in around him. His mind replayed Oladale's warnings, Joseph's pleas, and Clara's ultimatum. The darkness he had tried to ignore was now fully consuming him, and for the first time he truly understood the price of wealth. The days that followed were a haze for Michael. Sleep evaded him and food lost its taste. His once sharp mind, the same mind that had earned him admiration from Uyo's elite, was now consumed by an unrelenting storm of guilt and fear. Clara's words rang in his ears, a constant reminder of the impossible decision he had to make: prove his loyalty to the Brotherhood of the Eclipse or risk losing everything, including his life. Michael sought refuge in Esther, whose unwavering kindness offered him a momentary escape from the chaos. They met at a small cafe away from the prying eyes of the city's elites. "You've been distant," Esther said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "What's wrong, Michael? Talk to me." He wanted to tell her everything, to unburden himself of the darkness that had taken root in his soul. But the thought of dragging her into this world of blood and greed stopped him. Instead, he shook his head and forced a smile. "It's nothing, just work stress." Esther wasn't convinced, but she didn't press further. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone," she said. Her words pierced through Michael's defenses, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara: "Time's up, we'll see you tonight." That evening, Michael sat in his apartment, staring at the small black envelope that still sat on his desk. He hadn't carried out the task Clara had assigned him, and he knew there would be consequences. The knock on his door came sooner than he expected. Standing in the doorway was Damien Jr., his ever-smirking face now devoid of its usual charm. Behind him were two burly men who exuded menace. "You've been stalling, Michael," Damien said, stepping inside without an invitation. "That's not a good look for someone who wants to stay in the inner circle." Michael's heart pounded. "I need more time." Damien laughed coldly. "Time? Do you think this is a game? The Brotherhood doesn't wait. You were given a simple task and you failed. Now the price is higher." One of the men stepped forward and handed Damien a small velvet box. Damien opened it, revealing a photograph of Esther. Michael's blood ran cold. "Leave her out of this," he said, his voice shaking. Damien's smirk returned. "That's up to you. The Brotherhood has decided that Esther will be your test of loyalty. Bring her to us, or..." He trailed off, his silence more menacing than any threat he could have uttered. Michael felt the walls of his world crumbling around him. "Please," he begged. "She has nothing to do with this." Damien leaned in close, his voice a whisper. "Everyone has something to do with this. You wanted power, Michael. This is what it costs." The moment Damien and his men left, Michael called Joseph. His cousin arrived within minutes, finding Michael pacing the room, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "They want me to bring Esther to them," Michael said, his voice barely audible. Joseph's face darkened. "This is insane, Michael. You can't do it." "I know that," Michael snapped, his voice cracking. "But if I don't, they'll kill her. They'll kill me. I don't know what to do." Joseph placed his hands on Michael's shoulders, forcing him to stop pacing. Listen to me, you are not alone in this. We'll figure out a way to protect Esther and take these people down. But you cannot give them what they want. Michael sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I don't know if it's possible, Joseph. They're too powerful. Joseph knelt in front of him, his voice steady. Then we fight. You've already lost so much, Michael. Lose your soul too. That night, Michael made a decision. He wouldn't sacrifice Esther no matter the cost, but he knew he couldn't protect her alone. For the first time, he reached out to his father, Pastor Daniel Ekong. When Daniel arrived, Michael's apartment was dark except for a single lamp. Michael sat at the dining table, his face etched with desperation. I need your help, he said simply. Daniel sat across from him, his expression calm but concerned. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Michael poured out the entire story, the Brotherhood, the rituals, the threats. Daniel listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When Michael finished, Daniel spoke. You've taken the first step by coming to me, but the fight ahead won't be easy. These people operate in shadows, but they're not invincible. We'll expose them, Michael, but first we need to protect Esther. Michael, Daniel, and Joseph devised a plan. Michael would agree to meet with Clara and Damien, pretending to comply with their demands. Meanwhile, Daniel reached out to Akpan Udoh, the investigative journalist who had been tracking the Brotherhood's activities. Akpan was eager to help, seeing this as his chance to expose the cult's influence once and for all. The next night, Michael met Clara and Damien at an upscale restaurant. He played his part well, feigning submission as they discussed the logistics of delivering Esther. We'll take care of everything, Clara said with a smile. You just need to bring her to the estate tomorrow night. After that, you'll be one of us, Michael nodded, masking the dread churning in his stomach. I understand. But as he left the restaurant, he knew the clock was ticking. He had less than 24 hours to save Esther and himself from the grip of the Brotherhood. The following day dawned heavy with tension. Every passing minute felt like an hour as Michael finalized his plans with Joseph, Pastor Daniel, and Akpan. The stakes had never been higher. One wrong move, and the Brotherhood of the Eclipse would claim not only Esther's life but Michael's as well. Michael knew he couldn't let his fear show when he arrived at the Ikanem estate later that evening. The sprawling mansion glowed in the night, its towering gates opening like the maw of a beast as he approached. Dressed in a sharp suit, Michael carried himself with forced confidence, masking the turmoil within. Clara greeted him in the grand foyer, her sharp eyes scanning his face. You're punctual, that's good. Loyalty demands punctuality, she said with a cold smile. Damien Jr. appeared moments later, a dark presence as always. Is she here? He asked, his tone laced with eagerness. Michael nodded, his throat tightening. She's waiting outside in the car. I thought it would be best to ensure everything was ready before I brought her in. Clara's smile widened. Smart boy, you're learning. Unbeknownst to the Ekanems, Michael's car wasn't empty. Hidden in the shadows were Joseph and Akpan, armed with recording devices and ready to act. Pastor Daniel, watching from a safe distance, prayed silently for the success of their plan. As Michael entered the estate's dimly lit ritual chamber, he was greeted by the sight of the Brotherhood's council. They stood in a circle, their faces obscured by ceremonial masks, their black robes shimmering faintly in the candlelight. At the center of the room was an ornate altar, draped with crimson cloth and inscribed with ancient symbols. Ibrahim stood at the head of the circle, his imposing figure exuding authority. You've done well to bring her, he said, his voice echoing ominously. The gods are pleased with your commitment. Tonight you will take your place among us. Michael's heart pounded as he stepped forward. Before I bring her in, I need assurance that this is the final step, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. Ibrahim chuckled darkly. Your loyalty will seal your place here. But remember, the price of betrayal is death. Michael nodded and turned toward the door. He was stalling, giving Akpan and Joseph more time to gather evidence and position themselves. He knew he had to act quickly before the Brotherhood grew suspicious. Outside, Joseph whispered into his headset, "We're in position. The feed is live." Akpan nodded, watching the scene unfold through a hidden camera mounted on Michael's jacket. Every word, every movement was being recorded and streamed to a secure location. Back in the chamber, Michael returned, his hands empty. "She's gone," he said, feigning panic. "I left her in the car, but she's not there anymore." The room fell silent. Clara's smile faded, replaced by a look of icy fury. "What do you mean gone?" Michael stammered. I don't know. Maybe she got scared and ran." Damien Jr. stepped forward, grabbing Michael by the collar. "You're lying," he growled. "Do you think you can play games with us?" Ibrahim raised a hand, silencing Damien. "Calm yourself," he said. Turning to Michael, he added, "If she's gone, then you'll take her place." Michael froze, his mind racing. What do you mean?" "The gods demand a life," Ibrahim said coldly. "If you can't deliver her, then you will be the sacrifice." Before Michael could respond, Damien and 2 other members grabbed him, dragging him toward the altar. He struggled, but their grip was ironclad. Outside, Joseph and Akpan heard the commotion through their earpieces. "We have to move now," Joseph said, stepping out of the car with a determined look. Akpan nodded, clutching his camera. "Let's do this." As Michael was forced onto the altar, he felt the cold metal of a ceremonial dagger pressed against his chest. Ibrahim stood over him, his masked face looming. "Any last words?" Michael's mind raced. "You'll never win," he spat. "People will know the truth about you." Ibrahim chuckled. "What truth? You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing without us." At that moment, the doors to the chamber burst open. Joseph and Akpan stormed in, followed by a group of armed policemen Pastor Daniel had contacted earlier. "Everyone freeze," Joseph shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. The room erupted into chaos. Members of the Brotherhood scattered, some attempting to fight back while others fled. Akpan captured everything on his camera, ensuring there would be undeniable evidence of the cult's activities. Ibrahim, however, remained calm. As the police moved to arrest him, he removed his mask and smiled. "Do you think this ends here?" he said. "The Brotherhood is bigger than all of you. You've won nothing." Michael, shaken but alive, was helped off the altar by Joseph. The 2 embraced briefly before Michael turned to Akpan. "Did you get everything?" Akpan nodded. "Every last second." In the aftermath, the evidence Akpan gathered led to the arrest of multiple Brotherhood members, including Clara and Damien Jr. Their network of influence began to crumble, and the public outcry was deafening. However, Ibrahim escaped justice, disappearing before he could be taken into custody. The last anyone saw of him was a private jet taking off under the cover of darkness. Michael returned home, scarred but relieved. He reconciled with Esther, confessing everything and vowing to leave the world of ambition and greed behind. Together, they began to rebuild their lives, leaning on each other for strength. Pastor Daniel continued his mission to fight the darkness, knowing that the battle was far from over. He vowed to protect his son and anyone else ensnared by the Brotherhood's grasp. The chapter ends with Ibrahim sitting in an opulent room on his yacht, sipping wine as he watches news coverage of the arrests. A sinister smile crosses his face. "This is only the beginning," he says, hinting at the shadows that still linger. The ripple effects of the raid on the Brotherhood's ritual chamber were felt across the nation. News outlets ran explosive exposés on the arrests, thanks to Akpan's meticulous documentation. His recordings of the ritual, paired with testimonies from Michael, Joseph, and other victims, painted a chilling picture of the Brotherhood of the Eclipse's reach and influence. Among those arrested were Clara Ikanem, Damien Jr., and several high-ranking council members. Their faces were splashed across headlines, and public outrage surged as the scale of their corruption came to light. Yet the Brotherhood's leader, Alhaji Ibrahim Sani, had vanished. Despite the authorities' efforts, he remained a ghost, a reminder of the cult's lingering threat. Michael sat in a small, dimly lit room in the police headquarters, his hands clasped tightly together as he gave his final statement. His testimony was the linchpin in dismantling the Brotherhood's operations. He detailed everything: how he was recruited, the rituals, the threats, and his eventual resistance. Detective Bassi, the officer leading the investigation, leaned forward, his face grave. "You've done a brave thing, Michael. But you need to understand, people like Ibrahim don't disappear forever." He'll regroup, and when he does, he'll come for anyone who crossed him. Michael nodded. I've already made my peace with that. The detective studied him for a moment before speaking again. You're going to need protection, at least until we're certain he's no longer a threat. Michael thought of Esther, Joseph, and Pastor Daniel. He couldn't let the Brotherhood's shadow loom over their lives any longer. Do whatever you need to, he said. Meanwhile, Pastor Daniel stood at his pulpit, addressing a packed congregation. The events of the past weeks had reignited his sense of purpose, and he spoke with a renewed fire. The forces of darkness thrive in secrecy, he said, his voice echoing through the church. But light always exposes them. We must remain vigilant, for the battle is not over. Among the congregation sat Esther, her hands clasped in prayer. She had been Michael's anchor throughout the ordeal, and now she prayed for his safety and their future. Despite the arrests, the Brotherhood's influence lingered in the corridors of power. Some members went underground, their vast resources shielding them from the full weight of the law. Others used their connections to evade justice, creating frustration for both the public and the investigators. Akpan, now hailed as a national hero, continued his crusade against corruption. He worked tirelessly to uncover more about the Brotherhood's network, but every lead seemed to point back to the elusive Ibrahim. In the safety of a nondescript safe house, Michael, Joseph, and Pastor Daniel regrouped. They knew the fight wasn't over. Michael, Pastor Daniel said one evening, you've faced more than most men your age, but this is just the beginning. The Brotherhood won't stop until they regain control. You need to be ready for what comes next. Michael nodded, his resolve hardening. They took everything from me, my peace, my integrity, and almost my life. I won't let them win, Joseph leaned forward. Then we fight back, not just for us, but for everyone they've hurt. Across the Gulf of Guinea, Ibrahim stood on the deck of his private yacht, staring out at the vast dark ocean. He swirled a glass of wine in his hand, a satisfied smirk on his face, as he watched the news coverage of the Brotherhood's arrests on a nearby screen. They think they've won, he said, speaking to no one in particular. But they've only scratched the surface. Behind him, a shadowy figure emerged, draped in an expensive suit. Our resources in Nigeria have taken a hit, but the international network remains intact, the figure said. Ibrahim nodded. Let them celebrate. Let them think they've dismantled us. By the time they realize their mistake, it'll be too late. The two men clinked glasses, their laughter blending with the sound of the waves crashing against the hull. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.